1,943 years since Churban Bayis Sheni, and we are still sitting on the ground. Another Tisha B'Av is going to be celebrated as the last 1,942 have been. Everyone hoped that this year would be different. We'd all be celebrating a Yontif. But Anachnu lo noshanu. Obviously, there's still more to do. And the Ribono Shel Olam isn't satisfied that we're ready yet for the Geula. And that in itself is something to cry about. And that is the motif of this night. Bocho Sivke Balayla. This night is designated for crying. That is the avoda of Leff Tisha, Bechia. It has its roots in a Bechia Shel Chinam that our ancestors cried in the Midbar the night that the Meraglim returned. And the Ribono Shel Olam said, Atem bechisem b'shchia shel chinam. You cried this night a worthless, meaningless, baseless cry. Ani ekbal lachem b'chia ledoros. And because of that, I'll give you something to cry about for all generations. And another medrash says, Ani ekbal lachem b'chia shel mamish. You cried bechia shel chinam, I'll give you a bechia shel mamish to cry. And it's not chas v'sholem spite. You cried, I'll give you something to cry about. The Ribono Shel Olam doesn't function like that. But what we ruined with that bechia shel chinam, we are correcting with the Bechia Shel Mamish that we cry every year. And Amir Hashem, soon the time will come when the tears and the crying of all these thousands of years will be enough to correct that crying that night. And the Bechia tonight is not the crying of individuals. But Bocho Sivke, the Medrash says, Boche umevake acherim ima. We cry and we have others cry with us. It's a tzibur cry. It's not an individual cry. What was that Bechia Shel Chinam? What did they do wrong? Why did they cry? They felt that the Ribono Shel Olam hated them. Sina Hashem osanu hotzianu mimitzrayim. They felt totally separated from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hated them. And when you feel totally abandoned, hopeless, you cry. And that was the Bechia Shel Chinam, feeling detached from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates us. And when you're detached from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're detached from all other Yidden too. And you only worry about yourself. Nisheinu v'tapeinu, our wives and our children, that's what they were worried about, themselves and their families. But they weren't worried about the catastrophe of the cloud. They're only worried about themselves. That was the Bechia Shel Chinam, a Bechia of despair, a feeling that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hated them, a bechia of hopelessness, of total detachment from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and from each other. Reb Shimon Shkop Zatzal, in his Hakdama to Shara Yosher, explains the following. We have a mitzvah, Kedoshim Tiyu, Ki Kodosh Ani Hashem Elokeichem. What does it mean to be Kodesh? Says Reb Shimon, Kodesh means to do everything totally altruistically. Kodesh means to designate, where everything I do is designated towards the Klal, not just the Klal Yisrael, but the Klal of all the universe and all the worlds. What I do is not selfishly just for myself, but I do it with having that I'm part of eternity and part of the universe. It starts with my being part of Klal Yisrael. And whatever I do with that in mind. That's Kedoshim Tiyu. Totally altruistic, selfless. And in that way, we become more like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't do anything for himself. He doesn't need anything. Everything he does for others. He's totally altruistic, totally giving, totally selfless. However, the Medrash says, Kedoshim Tiyu Yochol Kamoni. I might think that you should be mamish like me. The way Reb Shimon learns, totally selfless. Don't you have yourself in mind at all. No. Kedushasi lamala mikidushaschem. Only I, says the Rabbanu Shalom, can be totally selfless. But a human being, I want him to be concerned about himself. A human being has to have self-concern. He has to love himself. Why? Because even though the goal of all existence, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create us? That we should be able to totally attach ourselves to Him, totally be mizdabek b'Hashem, and in that way, by being like HaKadosh Baruch Hu and being selfless like He is, Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokeichem, we become more like Him, and therefore we can have an attachment to Him. We can kibiyachol become part of Him. But there's another aspect to that. Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to earn that attachment and create it. We should feel it's ours. Because Rotza Adam bekav shalo mitisha kavan shel chaveiro. Person wants what's his. He has a feeling for his things. He has a feeling of self-concern. A recognition of oneself. So the whole purpose of this world is to give a person a feeling of self. And yet the whole purpose of everything is to totally be selfless. Says Reb Shimon, how do you resolve this conflict? You can't be totally selfless and have self-concern at the same time. Says Reb Shimon, you can. Depends how you look at yourself. Some people are very, very small people. And they consider themselves from their heels to their head. That's themselves. They have a big problem. Because on the one hand, you have to be concerned for everyone, selfless. On the other hand, you have to have self-concern. Big conflict. Some people a little bigger than that. And they recognize that their spouse is part and parcel of them. And that's themselves. Themselves are two bodies. Ishto kegufo, Baal keishto. So when they're concerned about their spouse, they're not concerned about someone else. That's self-concern. Some people are bigger than that. And they recognize that their children are part of them. It's also part of themselves. Bra kara davuam. And when they're concerned about their children, they're concerned about themselves. Self-concern. Now we have a lot of bodies that are included in that self. Some people are even bigger than that. And they recognize that all of their extended family, extended relatives, they're also part of themselves. Some people recognize their neighborhood, their city, the country, all of Klal Yisrael, all of the world. When a person, self, his ani, encompasses everyone, then there's no conflict anymore between self-concern and concern for everyone. It's all the same thing. So says Reb Shimon. He says that's what it means in Pirkei Avos. Imein ani li mili. If I'm not concerned about myself, who's going to be concerned about me? HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to be concerned about myself. But kishani li atzmi, when myself is only little me, mo ani, that's not what an ani is. That's not what a person is. Person has to look at himself as encompassing everyone and be concerned about himself, and at the same time he's concerned about everyone. That's Golus. That's an Adam Gadol. By Moshe Rabbeinu it says, Vayigdal hayeled, he grew physically. And then it says, Vayigdal Moshe, that he grew maturity. He matured. When was he considered a Gadol, a mature person? When Vayetzel Echo Vayar B'Sivlosa, when he cared about other people. Moshe Rabbeinu's whole Golus, Reb Chaim Vital says, what he was zoche to was because he was nosei ba'ol in Klal Yisrael, and he became mamish equal to Klal Yisrael. Nosan eina v'libo lios meitzer aleihem. How does a person consider himself, consider everyone part of himself? Intellectually, he feels and understands the needs of others, and emotionally, he feels the tsar, he feels the simcha of other people. Could be that that's hinted to in the word ani. Ani on one side is an aleph, the individual. On the other side is a yud, the tzibur, minion. What connects the aleph and the yud and makes that your ani? Chamishim shari tara and chamishim shari bina. You need a lot of seichel and a lot of heart to be able to connect the aleph and the yud and make that your ani. And that is kedusha. Kedusha is when you can attach yourself to the source of all kedusha, to the Ribono Shel Olam. And the only way you can do that is to blend self-concern and selfless concern together. Therefore, the mitzvah of Yohavta l'reyacha kamocha takes on new meaning. Without the kamocha, without the self-concern, the self-love, there can't be any Yohavta l'reyacha. But the Yohavta l'reyacha kamocha, you have to blend together the kamocha and the Yohavta l'reyacha to make them one, as Reb Shimon says. And that is what kedusha is. And that takes a tremendous amount of sensitivity, regishus, being sensitive to the needs of others, to being sensitive to the feelings of other people. And that's why when we lose that sensitivity, we lose kedusha. First Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Gili Arayis, Shvichas Damim, and Avodah Zarah. Gili Arayis is taiva. L'taiva yavakish nifrod. When a person is involved in satisfying his own base desires and lusts, he separates himself from all other people. He can't be sensitive to anyone. He's only sensitive to himself and his own needs. And he breaks up the unity. Gili Arayis breaks up the shchina, shruya b'neihem of ish v'isha. So that is totally separated totally insensitive to the klal. Shvichas damim is kina. People are jealous of each other, ad kedei kach, that they want to destroy the other person because he's a thorn in my side, and he'll be destroyed completely. That'll be the best thing. Jealousy leads to the bittul of other people, instead of being sensitive to them and being part of them, to want to destroy them. And avodah zarah corresponds to kavod. If a person has to attach himself and totally negate himself to the Ribono Shel Olam, then his kavod is being part of the Ribono Shel Olam's plan to the world. But avodah zarah is where I create gods in my image to give myself kavod. The avodah zarah are mekayimim al Eloheim. They use their gods to give themselves kavod. Whereas we're in this world to give kavod to the Ribono Shel Olam. So avodah zarah, gilui arayos and shvichas damim, basically make a person insensitive to anyone but himself, and that prevents any kind of kedusha, because kedusha is having that attachment to the Ribono Shel Olam that comes from selflessness. And therefore, the Makor HaKedusha, which was the Beis HaMikdash, was destroyed because of Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Dam, and Avodah Zarah. If there can't be Kedusha, then there can't be a Beis HaMikdash. The second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sina. Same idea. The same pirut, the same separateness, the same insensitivity that a person can achieve with Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Dam, and Avodah Zarah, a person can achieve directly with Sinas China. By feeling that the Ribono Shel Olam hates him, and if he hates him, he hates all Jews, and then there's no mitzvah to love any Jew, because the Ribono Shel Olam hates us. To feel totally detached, dejected, hopeless, separate from everybody else, insensitive, and that's what destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. Because when you are insensitive and detached, there can't be kedusha. There can't be a mikdash. And that's what Chazal say, akamtzo bar kamtzo. If you look at the mice in the Gemara, which I'm sure many of you are going to do, since that's one of the only things you're allowed to learn tonight and tomorrow. It's not clear exactly who was in the wrong over there. On the one hand, Bar Kamsa shouldn't have come to the party. He knew that he was this guy's enemy. He probably understood that it was a mistake. Why did he show up and ruin the guy's simcha? He knew that seeing him would not make his simcha any greater. So maybe Bar Kamsa was wrong to come to the Suda. On the other hand, maybe the host was wrong because he shouldn't have asked him to leave. But the Gemara doesn't say why the host didn't like Bar Kamsa. Maybe he had a good reason. Maybe he was justified. Maybe he had a good reason. Chachamim, maybe they felt that if they get involved, they'll complicate things. They wanted to think about it, wanted to investigate, whatever, so they didn't get involved when he was thrown out of the party. Who was wrong? The answer is everybody was right and everybody was wrong. But it wouldn't have happened if people were more sensitive to the feelings of other people. Everybody could be justified. But if you're sensitive, then each one would have acted differently had he been sensitive to the feelings of the other, not only to himself. But each one functioned according to his feelings, maybe justified, but didn't take into consideration the feelings of the other. The Torah Chaim and the Pnei Yoshua both say a similar idea on a different Gemara. The Gemara says that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed al shehamidu divreim al divrei Torah. So Tosfos asks, it says it was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. Why had midu divreim al divrei Torah? So they both explain what it means is the following. It's not that the Beis Din paskin lefi divrei Torah. There's nothing wrong with that. But the people weren't willing to compromise. They weren't willing to be sensitive that maybe the other one has some validity. And they wouldn't let the Beis Din make a pshara. They wouldn't let the Beis Din make a compromise. Because they were insensitive to the feelings of the other one. And that's exactly the same thing of Sinas Chinam. She'amidu divrei al divrei Torah is just another way of saying Sinas Chinam. Insensitivity to other people. How do you get sensitive? So we cried the night of Tisha B'Av, way back in the Midbar, because we were insensitive. Insensitive to our kesher with the Ribono Shel Olam. Insensitive to the fact that the Ribono Shel Olam loved us and didn't hate us. Insensitive also to the needs of each and every one, but only our own families, our own tragedy. And therefore the Ribono Shel Olam said, I'm going to give you a chance to cry and correct that. And the crying we do tonight, we may not understand what we're crying about. A lot of tzaras. Why did the Ribono Shel Olam put us into Golus? And the Ribono Shel Olam loves us. That's 100% the case. Lo ma'astim v'lo galtim lechalosam lehofer brisi ita. Golus is not because the Ribono Shel Olam hates us, chas v'sholom. He loves us. How is that love manifested with all the tzaras we see over the last 1943 years? Hard to understand. But if we cry like children, cry out to a parent who knows, the child knows the parent loves him, and he knows the parent cares, and the parent will hear the cry and do something. That's the kind of crying. Not feeling hopeless and abandoned, just the opposite. Feeling like a baby cries, that there's somebody who'll listen, there's somebody who cares. You don't have to understand that kind of crying. That kind of crying comes from being sensitive. So a Maisa. After World War II, there was a woman, he calls her Miriam Weller, it's not her name, one of the fortunate few who survived the concentration camps. And she moved to Denver, Colorado in the 1950s. And she couldn't stop thinking about the horrific past that she had, all the terrible things that she witnessed, all the terrible tortures that were given to her. And she couldn't find any inner peace. Somebody suggested that she speak to the Rav. The Rav at that time was Rabbi Daniel Goldberger in Denver. A young man. She came to him. She told him that she needs somebody to talk to who can understand and give her some kind of solace from her haunting memories. Rabbi Goldberger said to her, "Why'd you come to me? How can I possibly help you?" She said, "I've gone to so many people searching for some words of comfort, but no one has ever said anything that consoles me. Can you help me?" Rabbi Goldberger replied, "Miriam, I cannot think of any words of comfort, but I can cry with you." With those few words, Rabbi Goldberger began to cry, tears flowing freely from his eyes. Miriam, too, sobbed loudly, as she had never cried before. It was as if a dam of emotions had been released from within her. Rabbi Goldberger did not utter even one word as they wept together. After what seemed like an eternity, Miriam rose from her seat, dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief, and thanked Rabbi Goldberger. Just knowing how much you empathize with my pain makes me feel truly comforted. Now I feel I can begin my healing process, Miriam said. That's the kind of crying we cried tonight. Crying because we're sensitive to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We know that He wants to help us. He doesn't want us to sit here on the floor another year. And if we're a little sensitive to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and made our relationship with each other, that in itself will bring comfort. That's what it means. Kol ha'misabel Yerushalayim zoche v'roeh b'simchasa. Just being able to be sensitive to our plight is in itself part of the healing process. This year, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it easy for us to be sensitive. Because you have to have a heart of stone. Maybe even something harder than stone. Not to have been aroused by the murder of the Fogel family. If that wasn't enough to make somebody sensitive to the Tsar of Klal Yisrael, then the murder of Leiby Kletsky, horrific butchering of a little boy by a supposedly person who's a Shomer Torah mitzvahs, some mitzvahs. And if that wasn't enough, then the murder of a Talmid Chacham by somebody who was supposed to be his Talmud. And if that wasn't enough, the three elder Gedolei Yisrael all over the world, Eretz Yisrael, America, Europe, in 1 week, died. Somebody had to feel something from one of those things. It couldn't not have aroused a chord of sensitivity by everyone. Had to have something that they're sensitive to in one of those tragedies. You know, we had Gedolim who were sensitive even to people who were foolishly didn't know what to be sensitive about. Tell the story, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman once sitting with his Talmidim, and a woman came in, distraught, crying. Her son was sick. She didn't know what to do. She begged Rabbi Chanan to help her, give her a bracha. And Bein Hadvarim, she said, you know, I am really a numlelet, a miskenah. Other people can go and daven by the graves of their parents and beg them to be melitz yosher and shomayim. I can't even do that. My parents are alive. The two Talmidim looked at each other and smiled. Obviously, it was a stupid thing to say. She's an umlala because her parents are alive, so she can't go daven by kivrei avos. After the woman left, Rabbi Chanan looked at his Talmidim and he said, I don't understand how anyone could smile. A poor woman comes in, distraught about her only son, and you can smile because she said something idiotic? Where is your sensitivity to this woman's plight? So even if we are also like that, and we don't know what to be sensitive to, we don't know what we're crying about, but we have to get the sensitivity of a Rebbe Chanan to be able to be sensitive even under those circumstances. Rav Shach, you would think that he was a cold, insensitive person. For Haraya, he once had to have some minor surgery. And they told him that, however, even though it's minor surgery, they're going to have to give him a total anesthesia, and it's going to put him out of commission for about a day. He said, impossible. There's no way the surgery itself will not put me out of commission that I'm going to be subject to anesthesia. It's going to stop me from learning for an entire day. He said, I'll take the operation without the anesthesia. He said, it's very painful. He said, don't worry. They gave him the operation without the anesthesia, and he was able to go through the operation and get back on his feet much faster than he had to recover from the anesthesia. So you would think, here's a person who was unfeeling, didn't have too many feelings, not too sensitive, otherwise how do you go through such a thing? Yet a few days after that, he heard them whispering in the anteroom where he was, and he demanded to know what they're talking about. They didn't want to tell him. Just been the terrible tragedy of the helicopter crash. Tens of Jewish soldiers were lost in a terrible accident. And they knew that if Rav Shach heard about it, he would be umensch. And that's what happened. They told him what happened, and he started to cry uncontrollably. Uncontrollably. Those are the way Gedolim are sensitive. But it's not only Gedolim. During the Gulf War, family came from Chutz La'aretz to give chizuk to the people here. They were in Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim, and they heard some fighter jets flying overhead. They saw a woman burst out crying. Obviously, these jets were going into battle. Who knows if they'd come back or not? Middle of a war. So the woman went over to the woman who came from Chutz La'aretz to give chizuk, went over to this woman, and she said, I feel for you. She said, your husband who's in one of those planes? Your son? She said, no, but it's somebody's husband and somebody's son. That's how a Jew has to be. Your son, your husband, somebody's husband, somebody's son. Does it make a difference if it's yours or someone else's? That's a pashut person, not a God will be Yisrael. There's even sensitivity, not necessarily to big things, to little things. So a mice of a person before the Holocaust who was a gvir, and he did chesed with Yisomim. He owned a shoe factory, and he donated shoes to a Beis Yisomim for orphans. He made sure that the shoes that he gave them were not shoes that he couldn't sell because they were seconds or imperfect. He gave them the best shoes, that a Yosem shouldn't feel that he's getting seconds because he doesn't deserve good shoes. He wouldn't let anyone be involved in giving these shoes out for fear that they hurt the feelings of these Yisomim. So he himself took care of it. And he didn't give the shoes out as if they're getting tzedakah. He created a store, gave out certificates that the Yisomim should feel that they were buying these shoes, just like anybody else buys shoes. And he made sure they got exactly the styles that they wanted. because it wasn't enough just to see to it that these Yisomim had shoes. But he was sensitive enough to know that they felt they got the shoes in a derech kovid, not in a way that they felt that because they were Yisomim, that's why they got these shoes. There are some who are sensitive even to the most subtle things. Somebody had twin boys, came to Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He says it's a new thing for him. He doesn't know anything about the brisson of twins. So he asked Shlomo Zalman, should we bring both children in together or should we bring them separately? Shlomo Zalman looked at me and said, how in the world could you think to bring the two children together? That means that one is going to be there while the other one gets his bris. He's going to hear his brother crying. How can you subject a little baby to have to listen to his brother crying from the pain of the bris? Of course you bring them in separately. The first one come, the second one shouldn't have to be subject to hearing the second twin crying during the bris. And there's some people who are not only sensitive to physical pain, but spiritual pain too. Kaplan, wife was the founder of the Beis Yaakov in Williamsburg. Somebody came into the Beis Medrash and found him crying uncontrollably. They asked him what had happened. He said, a few minutes before this, somebody insulted somebody here in the Beis Medrash. He said, if I saw somebody murder someone here, wouldn't I be crying uncontrollably? And Chazal say that Amal b'nei chaveiro b'rabim is mamish like shvichas damim. I saw somebody murdered. I shouldn't cry. We have plenty to be sensitive about. Aside from murders, cruelty, but look at the world around us. We don't have to look for other generations and speak about the Holocaust. Look at the tsaris, people with poverty. What's going on in Eretz Yisrael today? People protesting because they can't afford to buy some milk products. People don't have a place to live. I got a call before Shabbos from a representative of an organization that supports the people of Gush Katif, who still, years later, people thrown out of their homes in order that the Arabs should be able to shoot rockets at us. Still have not found, many of them, a permanent place. Haven't been compensated for the businesses that they lost. They're wandering without a place to live, without financial help. There's an organization that helps them. It's supported by very, very fine people. They ask that we become part of the drive that they're making over Tisha B'Av in many, many kehilas to help them. I'm going to mention it tomorrow again. Tonight I've asked our Yeshiva Bacher Chaim Gelman to be the Gabbai. He has receipts that they sent me. There's a flyer up outside if you want more information. He has a flyer with even more information. And anybody who can help these people out, be a little sensitive, do something on Tisha B'Av Lamaisa, I strongly suggest that you become partners with these unfortunate people. And the threats from the Arabs, Hamas, Palestinian Authority, our friends, Iran, Egypt, the President of the United States, how much hatred there is for Haredim and for frum people, for Mityashvim. how much we're guilty of insensitivity, Ashkenazim and Sfardim, and the Sinas Chinam in our own camp, in our own place. Isn't that enough to be sensitive to? Do we need any more reasons to cry? How hard can our hearts be? And therefore, let's take advantage of the school of this night. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us one night a year to cry. I hesitate to have given this whole thing, because the Bali Musar say that if somebody can't fulfill himself what he's telling other people to do, then he shouldn't talk about it. I find it very, very difficult to cry. And maybe I am not as sensitive as I should be. Maybe that's an understatement. But I feel that since my responsibility is to let you guys know what you're supposed to do, then maybe I'll get a tramp on somebody here who'll cry. That if I caused it, at least I'll get some of the credit for it. And Baruch Hashem, we have sensitive people here. So you be the ones to carry us all. And cry tonight, especially the women. Women have an easier time to cry. Dimoseim Krovos. And maybe if you cry and have us all in mind, be sensitive to those who can't cry. Cry for us. And maybe we'll all benefit. And Mirz Hashem, if we are sensitive enough, as it says in the keynotes tonight, we'll hear the Malachim crying, and the Mazalos crying, and the whole Bria crying. And we'll hear the Rabbanu Shalom crying. And if we cry along with that, b'mistorim tivke nafshi, even if it's not a open, tearful cry, but it's a cry that comes from within the neshama, and that also will count. And maybe the crying tonight, the bechia shel mamish, will finally correct the bechia shel chinam, and we won't have to cry anymore. We'll be able to turn these days l'sason u'lesimcha u'lemoadim tovim b'mheirav yameinu.